Hello, I'm Nate, aka B-Tier Mutineer, and today I'm going to showcase what I consider to be the best pre-made classes in the Elder Scrolls Morrowind. When I say best, I mean a class that is well built in terms of its chosen skills, attributes, and specialization, so the skills synergize, or at least make sense together, but I also chose the classes that I think are easy to play, because in general with my guides I like to keep them as beginner-friendly as possible. I myself am not a super skilled gamer, so I gravitate towards builds that are less complex and require less fuss, so keep in mind that it's possible some of the other pre-made classes may be quote-unquote better from the perspective of a high-skilled player or a min-maxer, and this is just my beginner-friendly list. I will generally assume you are just buying spells from vendors and not creating your own. The spellmaking system in Morrowind can be overpowered, and I feel like it's a bit of an exploit, or at the very least defeats the purpose of progressing naturally through the game. Though in some cases, there aren't a lot of good options for a specific spell effect in terms of the spells you can get from vendors, so in that case I absolutely recommend picking up the relevant spell effect and then making your own actually useful spell. Before we get into the list, I'll take a moment to say a special thank you to my members who help keep this channel running. I'd really appreciate it if you'd consider joining as a member to support me and unlock perks like early access to videos. Joining is very much appreciated, but not required. I am always thankful, even if you just take the time to like the video and maybe leave a comment. Back to the video. There are three main combat specializations: combat, stealth, and magic, and thus three main archetypes of character classes or builds. Obviously, you can mix and match between the skills under the specializations and have a hybrid class. Even most of the pre-made classes are in essence hybrids, but you will usually have a more dominant gameplay style. So I'm organizing the pre-made classes I recommend by archetype: warrior, rogue, mage, and finally, a couple of more hybrid-leaning builds. If you already know you have a preferred playstyle in RPGs, you can of course skip to the timestamp for the class archetype you enjoy playing the most, though you may also learn something from my thoughts on the other classes too. I'll start the list with a warrior, which I consider to be the simplest archetype to play. You wear heavier armor and hit enemies mostly in melee with possibly some ranged combat, while usually avoiding using stealth or spells. It's a very straightforward type of gameplay, but at the same time it can struggle with things like exploration or fighting ranged or physically resistant enemies. Obviously, you can have some form of ranged combat against the former, and enchanted weapons and other magical gear for the latter. But the warrior will still be most comfortable in combat, specifically melee combat. The pre-made classes I recommend for the warrior archetype are the warrior, to no one's surprise, it's literally called the same thing as the archetype, and the Crusader. Let's start with the warrior class. Its specialization is combat, which means it gets a +5 to the skills under the combat umbrella. All the melee weapons other than the short blade, medium and heavy armor, armorer, block, and athletics. All of the specialized skills also level up faster, only needing 80% of the usual XP. The two favorite attributes are strength and endurance, which both get +10. These two are great attributes to get bonuses to. Strength helps you with damage in melee and ranged combat. It increases your fatigue, your maximum carry weight, your chance to repair an item, together with the armorer skill, and your starting health. Endurance affects how much maximum health you have. Each time you level up, your endurance is divided by 10, and the result is added to your current maximum. So it's good to increase your endurance from early on to be able to gain as much extra max health as possible. Endurance also increases your max fatigue and determines how quickly your fatigue regenerates. This is super important since your fatigue bar being full, or as close to full as possible, helps your attacks be more likely to hit. The 5 major skills of the warrior are long blade, medium armor, heavy armor, athletics, and block. I'm not a fan of having athletics as a tagged skill because you level it up fairly easily just by playing the game, since running and swimming are going to increase it, and yeah, you'll be doing a lot of that. The reason I don't like athletics is that its governing attribute is speed, so that means you'll get bonuses to leveling up your speed attribute if you increased athletics a bunch while progressing towards your next character level. Speed is not the best attribute to level up. Yes, it's useful to move faster, but you'll already be moving faster just by leveling up athletics, and it's far more important to level up your other attributes that actually affect your attacks, spells, health and magicka, and fatigue pools, and so on. Still, the other major skills are quite good. The main weapon of the warrior is the long blade, and you can pair it with a shield to make use of the block skill. And then you have your choice of armor between medium and heavy, whichever you prefer. It's nice to have the option, though medium armor is not great in Morrowind, as tends to be the case in most RPGs really. But if you like the visual design of medium armor, feel free to use it since you'll have a good starting level to the skill, and so it's perfectly viable. The 5 minor skills of the warrior are armor, spear, marksman, axe, and blunt weapon. So here is where the warrior makes the other weapons decent to use as well by including them as minor skills. You can, if you'd like, make your warrior a master of many weapons and switch between them as it suits you. Though, of course, you will at least at the beginning of the game have an advantage with long blades, and will need some time to increase your other weapon skills to the same level naturally, or money if you want to train them up at trainer NPCs. I appreciate the fact that the marksman skill is included here, because as a melee fighter you may struggle against ranged enemies, so it's a great idea to have a bow and some arrows in your inventory just in case. The armorer skill is always useful if you're using actual weapons and armor, because you'll be better at repairing them yourself and won't have to spend so much money at smiths for repairs. You still need repair hammers or tongs, but you can easily find those in chests at the Fighters Guild, which you're likely to join since you're a pure fighter. I don't necessarily think the warrior is the easiest class to play per se, because you are pretty limited by the fact that you don't have any of the magic schools tagged as major or minor skills, which means their XP progress will be slower. Restoration would be useful to help you heal yourself in combat, as well as cure yourself of various afflictions, though of course you can always just stock up on potions for this purpose. You also don't have alchemy as a tagged skill, so while you can craft potions, it's going to suck at first, and you'll have to do it quite a lot, or else get training in alchemy in order to make potions that are actually worth using. Same thing goes for other spell schools, but perhaps more importantly, the alteration and security skills, which can both help you unlock doors and chests in your travels. The lack of either of these actually does hurt, since unless you take the time to train security or alteration, or get scrolls that help you unlock things, you may get stuck in certain situations due to not being able to get past a locked door, or for example not being able to complete a quest because you can't obtain a quest item from the locked chest. The open spell scrolls I mentioned can help, but they're not easy to get. Ondusi's Unhinging is a lower level open scroll and can be bought from various merchants, but Akasha's Lock Splitter, the higher level scroll, can only be found as random loot. So do keep in mind that as a pure warrior, you'll struggle somewhat with this aspect of exploration, and try to make up for your weaknesses with scrolls, or training up either alteration or security so you can use an open spell or a lockpick successfully by yourself. However, despite these weaknesses, the warrior has an extremely simple playstyle, which just requires you to find a weapon, any weapon, and smack enemies with it, and try to get some decent armor while you're exploring. You'll find lots of good weapons throughout the game from loot, quest rewards, and merchants, and the same thing goes for armor and shields. There's tons of enchanted items among all of these, and you can essentially get a lot of the utility you're missing by not using magic yourself from enchanted items with spells or magical effects attached to them. So overall, I do think the warrior is a solid choice as far as pre-made classes go, especially if you like going all in on the fighting aspect and don't really want to use magic or stealthy gameplay, whether due to personal preferences or as a role-playing choice. However, my personal favorite pre-made class for the warrior archetype is the Crusader. This class also has combat as a specialization, so all combat skills get a +5, medium and heavy weapons, block, armor, athletics, and all melee weapons other than short blades. The favorite attributes are strength and agility, so they both get +10. Strength increases your damage with all weapons, your max encumbrance, fatigue, and even affects starting health, so it's always great for someone who wants to do a lot of fighting in melee. Agility affects your chance to hit with a weapon and dodge physical attacks, your ability to use sneak, security, and block, your max fatigue, and your resistance against getting knocked down. Personally, I prefer these attributes over the strength plus endurance of the warrior. You can increase your endurance fairly easily if you focus on that in the early levels, but having a higher agility from the get-go means it's going to be much easier to hit enemies, and that tends to be the most frustrating part of Morrowind in the early game. The Crusader's major skills are blunt weapon, long blade, destruction, heavy armor, and block. I'm a bit surprised by the destruction school of magic being included here, and I guess you could argue that the Crusader is a hybrid class because it does have access to magic, but there's very few pure pre-made classes, and especially good ones. Plus there's nothing forcing you to use destruction spells, it's just an option if you want it. Otherwise, the major skills are focused on two types of weapons that are very Crusader-like, long swords and blunt weapons, wearing heavy armor and blocking more effectively with a shield. The Crusader's minor skills are Armorer, hand-to-hand, medium armor, restoration, and alchemy. I'm surprised by hand-to-hand being included, not really sure what that has to do with the Crusader archetype, but I guess if all your weapons break, and you run out of magicka so you can't cast any destruction spells to damage your enemies, you could use your fists as a last resort. The rest are very good. Armorer makes you better at repairing your items. Medium armor is a good second choice for a warrior type character, though it's not as effective as heavy armor. Restoration is my personal favorite skill because you can heal yourself without needing to lug a million restore health potions. Having some potions is good though, since you may run out of magicka, and that's where alchemy is actually quite nice. I'm going to include some tips for using alchemy, aka a few basic recipes in the tips section after I discuss all the classes, but know that you can save a lot of money on potions if you craft yourself restore health and fatigue potions. The same thing I said for the warrior's exploration weaknesses applies to the Crusader, since you don't have access to either alteration or security to help you unlock doors and chests. However, you do at least have alchemy, so you can craft yourself things like potions of levitation, swift swim, water walking, water breathing, which help you traverse more difficult areas and reach places you may not have been able to otherwise. And then using either restoration or alchemy, you can have sources of healing or curing diseases. Destruction is always a useful magic skill to have, allowing you to use elements that enemies are weak to, or at least use it in the situation when enemies are resistant to physical damage, but don't have strong resistances against elements. And you could also use an effect like damaging an attribute or draining an enemy's fatigue to just make melee combat easier for you. So overall, the Crusader feels like a slightly more sophisticated version of the warrior, with a bit of magic and alchemy giving it extra versatility. I think the Crusader is the easier warrior archetype class to play out of the two, but if you don't like using magic or feel a bit intimidated by it, I would understand picking the warrior over it. Before we move on to the rogue, there is one more pre-made class that I wanted to give a special mention to. The Knight is similar to the Crusader with a combat specialization, of course, and strength plus personality as favored attributes. The major skills are Longblade, Axe, Heavy Armor, Block, and Speechcraft. The minor skills are Restoration, Mercantile, Enchant, Medium Armor, and Armorer. The focus on personality, Speechcraft, and Mercantile is what made this not as good as the Crusader, since those are honestly not that useful in the game. Yes, there are certain quests in which you'll need people to like you, but you can just do that by bribing them, so it's not necessary to invest into Speechcraft. And considering how much valuable loot you can find in the game, you don't really need Mercantile to make more money by selling them, you'll make plenty without. But the Knight might be better for you if you prefer only having Restoration as a magical skill, or if you're enticed by the Enchant skill so that you can use enchanted items for longer before they run out of juice, or get better at enchanting items either at an NPC or by yourself. It's not a bad class by any means, evidently it was the third on my list for warriors, but the focus on social skills makes it a bit less useful than the other two. Moving on to the rogue archetype. This archetype focuses on stealth, taking enemies by surprise, using daggers and bows, stealing things, lockpicking, and moving quickly to avoid detection or to get away. I will admit that this is usually my least played archetype in RPGs because I suck at stealth, but I have used rogue gameplay in Morrowind a lot because I usually play as a hybrid class that does a bit of everything. The pre-made classes I recommend for the rogue are the Thief, this is the pure rogue class, and the Bard. This is the elevated and slightly more complex class. I've chosen these two classes because they have the best combination of skills out of all of the classes with a focus on stealth. Starting with the Thief, its specialization is stealth, which means all skills under the stealth umbrella get a +5 and they level up faster. That's acrobatics, light armor, hand-to-hand, mercantile, marksman, short blade, speechcraft, sneak, and security. The favorite attributes are agility and speed. Agility is great since it increases your fatigue, your chance to hit with a weapon, and dodge physical attacks, your ability to use sneak, security, and block, and your resistance against getting knocked down. Speed is not as useful because it just affects how quickly you move around. You'll naturally get faster by leveling your athletics from just traversing the world, so I always found setting speed as a favorite attribute to be useless outside of some challenge runs. The Thief's major skills are security, sneak, acrobatics, light armor, and short blade. This is a great spread of major skills. You have short blade as your weapon and light armor for protection. Acrobatics is actually a good pick here because it's the only stealth skill that's governed by strength, so it'll help you increase your strength whenever you level up. And finally, you have security and sneak, which are great for stealing items, getting into locked areas or containers, and of course, sneaking up to enemies to kill them more easily before they start heading back. The thief's minor skills are marksman, speechcraft, hand-to-hand, mercantile, and athletics. As usual, I don't really like seeing athletics as a tagged skill because it's governed by speed, and you already have short blade as a skill that can increase your speed, plus now hand-to-hand, so athletics feels overkill. Still, I do understand that speed is one of the favorite attributes of the class, and Shortblade in particular benefits from it, so the inclusion of athletics here isn't as bad as in the other classes. Marksman is a great skill since it allows you to use ranged weapons to attack enemies from afar. This is super useful when you're up against dangerous enemies that could kill you easily if they got in melee range, and of course you could get in some damage without enemies even noticing you if you're sneaking successfully while shooting them. Hand-to-hand isn't necessarily the best rogue-aligned skill because fist fighting in Morrowind is a bit more complicated, especially for beginners due to the fact that it first drains the fatigue of an enemy, and only when their fatigue reaches 0 do you start to damage their health with your punches. Mercantile and speechcraft are fine enough for a rogue, especially since the thief already has what it needs for combat and exploration, so these two are just a little bonus. What I like most about the Thief is that it doesn't push multiple armor skills on your character and instead just focuses on light armor, which is the quintessential rogue armor type. It's also super easy to understand what this class does well, it's all in the skills. The only downside to the Thief is that sneak doesn't work like in other RPGs or even Elder Scrolls games. You don't have a clear indicator on whether enemies or NPCs can see you or not, and so it can be hard to steal items or do sneak attacks properly. Pickpocketing is something that I frankly don't use at all, and with how I've never heard anyone talking about it, even though it's technically possible, I will assume it's not very good. However, once you get used to the stealth system somewhat, it is absolutely useful for the purpose of stealing stuff and dealing critical damage to enemies. As per usual with fully martial classes, you are missing out on healing and other useful effects from magic. You'll have to buy potions and scrolls and use enchanted items where possible to make up for the lack of magic at your fingertips. Overall, the Thief is the perfect class if you want to play as a rogue. Next up, the Bard. This is the more sophisticated class, meaning that it also has access to some magic you can use for rogue activities. The specialization is stealth, of course, meaning all stealth skills get a +5 and level up faster. The favorite attributes are personality and intelligence, which both get a +10. I'll be honest, the favorite attributes here aren't great. Intelligence determines your magicka, and personality affects your base disposition with NPCs, your ability to persuade people, and your ability to bargain in combination with mercantile. So as you can see, these two attributes won't really help you in combat at all, though intelligence is useful if you plan on using the spell school that's part of this class. The Bard's major skills are alchemy, acrobatics, block, longblade, and speechcraft. Longblade and block is an interesting skill combination for a stealth-focused class, since these are both combat skills under strength and agility respectively. Using these skills means you'll be able to increase your strength and agility fairly easily when you level up though, which is very nice since they will increase your damage and chance to hit, among other useful things. Acrobatics is also a great stealth skill as I mentioned earlier because it's governed by strength, so it'll be easier to increase strength when you level up since acrobatics will easily be leveled just by jumping and taking fall damage. Alchemy is nice to have for the purpose of creating simple potions for yourself at a cheaper price than buying them from merchants, as well as being able to combine effects, like having a potion that restores both health and fatigue at the same time. Speechcraft isn't very useful, as I mentioned earlier in the Thief class, but it does increase your disposition with NPCs, makes you more likely to persuade them, and makes you better at haggling together with Mercantile. I would have preferred having something more useful as a final major skill, but it's not bad and it definitely fits the theme of the Bard. It would have been great if it wasn't so easy to persuade NPCs by bribing them, and if more quests and situations required speechcraft checks. The Bard's minor skills are Enchant, Illusion, Medium Armor, Mercantile, and Security. Enchant is useful if you're planning on using a lot of enchanted items, since they're going to have charges for longer, and of course you'll also find it easier to enchant items either at an NPC or by yourself. Medium Armor is an interesting choice for a Bard. I personally would have expected light armor, but I do like the visuals of it, so for me it's a plus. Medium armor isn't as effective as light or heavy armor, but it's not totally bad and certainly better than the unarmored skill, so don't worry, it's fine to use. I do think there's less medium armors and medium shields with good enchantments on them, but you should still be able to find some decent ones out there. Security is a must-have for any rogue class since you'll likely be doing a lot of going into restricted areas and looting locked containers. Mercantile is useful just like Speechcraft, but not super necessary since you can make a lot of money just from the tons of valuable items you can find while exploring dungeons and other areas in the game, not to mention stolen items you can sell for a very nice profit. Finally, Illusion is an interesting spell school and certainly fits the bard thematically. There are some effects like Chameleon, which works super well for a rogue-type class. For example, if you have 75% Chameleon or more, you should be able to sneak past most enemies or NPCs, and it'll help you steal items more easily. I actually like having Illusion as a tagged skill more than Sneak, because you can use it for more effects than sneaking around, like calming creatures or humanoids, blinding or paralyzing enemies, charming NPCs so their disposition increases. You could even cast a frenzy spell on an NPC you need to kill who isn't open to persuasion and so can't be taunted into attacking you, but you're trying to avoid getting an assault charge. There aren't a super large amount of powerful illusion spells to buy from vendors, but this is one case where I think spell making would be a good choice so you can craft a powerful chameleon, charm, or paralysis effect. I will also caution you here against the invisibility effect, because that one immediately dissipates when you activate anything, such as using an item, attacking, opening a door or container, talking to someone, or any other action other than moving. You can certainly use invisibility to move past hostile creatures with ease, but keep in mind you can't do anything else other than move. Overall, the Bard is slightly more complex as a rogue class than the Thief, making use of illusion as a magic school and being a bit more martially inclined with a long blade and shield instead of the short blade and marksman of the Thief. Finally, I'd like to give a special mention to another roguish class that is a bit more of a hybrid like the Bard, but still fits far more as a rogue than a true hybrid, the Nightblade. Its specialization is magic, interestingly enough, meaning that all magic skills, all the spell schools plus alchemy, unarmored, and enchant get a +5. The favorite attributes are willpower and speed. Speed isn't great as previously mentioned since it just makes you move faster, but willpower is actually pretty nice because it increases your max fatigue, makes you more likely to cast spells of any school, and increases your chance of innately resisting paralyze and silence magical effects. The Nightblade's major skills are Alteration, Illusion, Mysticism, Shortblade, and Sneak. Alteration is great for opening locked doors and containers, as well as many useful exploration effects, Levitation, Swift Swim, Water Walking, Water Breathing, Jump, Feather, and so on. Illusion can be a powerful magic school to use for a rogue, as I discussed for the Bard. Mysticism is an interesting one because it does have useful spells like Mark and Recall and Intervention for teleporting around, detecting keys, soul trapping enemies to fill up soul gems, using telekinesis to set off a trap from a chest remotely, or picking up items or stealing them from afar. Shortblade and Sneak are of course great for a rogue, so I won't go into detail about them. The Nightblade's minor skills are Light Armor, Unarmored, Destruction, Marksman, and Security. Security is great, plus you also have Alteration to help you open locked things just in case. Marksman is always a welcome addition to martial classes because it gives them a way to attack enemies from afar, and for stealth-inclined characters in particular, it's great for sneak attacks which deal critical damage. Light Armor and Unarmored are good armor choices for a rogue, so it's not a bad thing that you have both as an option. Finally, Destruction is of course a powerful option for attacking enemies with elemental damage, either from afar with ranged spells or up close with touch spells. This is my personal favorite rogue class because it has a good amount of magic that fits the playstyle, and I just really like the idea of a spell thief kind of rogue. But I just included it as a special mention because it is quite a bit more complex to play than the Thief and Bard due to the extra spell schools. But in all honesty, you should have a good time with any of these three rogue classes because, as tends to be the case in many games, rogues are quite powerful if played well. Moving on to the Mage archetype. This archetype focuses on using magic to do most things, from killing enemies to healing and buffing yourself and your allies, conjuring creatures or gear, casting various spells to help in exploration, opening locked doors and containers, crafting your own potions, and so on. Obviously, using magic for everything is for the purest of mages, but even the other magic-focused classes will have magic doing the heavy lifting in combination with a few things like a weapon skill or something like that. The pre-made classes I recommend for the Mage archetype are the Mage, to no one's surprise, it's literally named after the archetype, and the Healer, which also has a little bit of martial power and is of course more focused on the defensive and utility magic schools. Starting with the Mage, its specialization is magic, of course, which makes all magic skills get a +5 and level up faster. That's all the spell schools plus alchemy, enchant, and unarmored. The favorite attributes are intelligence and willpower. Intelligence is super important for a mage because it increases your maximum magicka. Willpower increases your chance to successfully cast spells of any school, increases your maximum fatigue, and your ability to innately resist paralyze and silence magical effects. Intelligence and willpower are absolutely the attributes I would favor for a mage class, since increased magicka and chance to cast are the most important things. The mage's major skills are Alteration, Destruction, Illusion, Mysticism, and Restoration. Alteration is great for exploration purposes as well as unlocking doors and chests, and the latter part is especially important since you don't have security as a tagged skill. Destruction is likely the main way you'll be dealing damage to enemies, with spells of various elements either at range or up close, though in the case of the pure mage, range is preferred since you won't necessarily have great defenses. Illusion is a great utility spell school, allowing you to calm or frenzy creatures and NPCs, cast Chameleon on yourself, paralyze enemies, and so on. Mysticism is also a great utility spell school for things like teleportation and telekinesis most of all, though detecting keys is also very useful sometimes. Finally, Restoration is amazing for healing and curing yourself or others, and restoring your attributes in case certain enemies damaged them. The mage's minor skills are Alchemy, Conjuration, Enchant, Shortblade, and Unarmored. Alchemy is a great utility skill if you enjoy crafting items, because you can make some very nice potions cheaply with it, especially potions that combine effects like restoring health and fatigue at the same time, curing diseases or blight or certain effects, resisting certain elements, restoring attributes, and so on. Conjuration is a super nice spell school, one of my favorites in fact, because it allows you to summon creatures to fight for you, as well as conjure weapons and armor that are way better than basic items, and also have an enchantment on them that fortifies the skill or attribute related to that piece of gear. They also count as magical for the purposes of attacking things like ghosts as far as I'm aware, so it's really nice to have Conjuration, even if just for the purpose of casting Bound Dagger, so that you can get a good Daedric Dagger with a fortified short blade effect. Enchant is always nice so you can use your enchanted items for longer, as well as get into enchanting items yourself if you'd like. Shortblade is the martial weapon of choice for this class, just in case you run out of magicka and can't restore it with a potion or something. You won't be great at using a dagger unless you train it up though, so do keep that in mind. And ideally use a bound dagger since that will increase your skill as well. Finally, Unarmored is of course the only choice of an armor skill for a pure mage, and makes perfect sense. You'll be able to use enchanted robes, shoes, and possibly non-armored gloves as well, though in some cases like for gloves there's very few enchanted options, so you may want to enchant some gloves yourself with an effect or spell you find useful. Overall, the pure mage is very solid with tons of options on how to approach all sorts of situations in combat, exploration, or even social or stealthy situations. Even if you get most or all of your spells from vendors without spellmaking, you can do pretty much everything. Spellmaking would be useful to make powerful effects for magical effects you like, but which you don't think have super good spells from vendors. Moving on to the Healer class, its specialization is also magic, meaning that all magic skills get a +5 and level up faster. The favored attributes are Willpower and Personality. Personality doesn't really help you much for casting spells, it's only useful for your interactions with NPCs, but Willpower thankfully affects your chance to successfully cast spells of any school, so that's nice. I'd certainly recommend picking a star sign like the Mage that increases your maximum magicka, and generally focusing on increasing your intelligence so that you can have more magicka to work with. The healer's major skills are Alteration, Hand-to-Hand, Mysticism, Restoration, and Speechcraft. Alteration will help you out with traversal and opening locked doors and chests. Hand-to-Hand is a decent option, though I caution beginners against using it unless they understand how it works properly. Hand-to-hand attacks will first drain the fatigue of the target, and only once the target's fatigue reaches 0 will you start damaging their health. A Drain Fatigue touch spell from the Destruction School would actually be super useful if you want to more easily play a fist fighter. Mysticism is nice for utility like teleportation, detecting keys, telekinesis, soul trapping, and so on. Restoration is always super good because you can restore your health, cure diseases, blight, poison, or paralysis, and of course restore your attributes in case they get damaged by certain types of enemies. Speechcraft isn't particularly needed, but it does work thematically for a healer character who will likely be better liked by people just on virtue of being more useful to them. The healer's minor skills are Alchemy, Blunt Weapon, Illusion, Light Armor, and Unarmored. Alchemy is a wonderful utility skill since you can craft good potions cheaply rather than needing to rely on vendors or random loot for them. You can find lots of ingredients out in the wild and in containers while exploring, plus buy them usually for decent prices from vendors. Some effects have ingredients that are rare and more expensive, but even so, if you have a good alchemy skill, you're better off buying or finding these ingredients and making a better potion yourself, likely still for a cheaper price than buying a fancy potion from a vendor. Blunt weapon is the weapon of choice for the healer, and this fits the kind of cleric vibe I'm getting from it. Light armor and unarmored are the armor skill choices, which makes sense for the healer. If you're planning on using your blunt weapon or perhaps your fists in melee against enemies, then I'd recommend light armor. Finally, illusion is a wonderful utility spell school if you want to do sneaky or weirder things like calming or frenzying creatures or NPCs, though you may need to invest a bit into it by spell making some better effects. Overall, the healer is a nice option for a not-so-pure mage class, though I will say that since it doesn't have destruction or conjuration as tagged skills, you do kind of have to use either blunt or hand-to-hand for damage, or train up your destruction or conjuration if you'd rather use spells for that. You could also use spell scrolls or enchanted items with spells on them, but that could get tedious. So personally, I recommend the light armor plus weapon or fists combo in melee combat, since you can use various utility magical effects from your spells like fortifying your attack or attributes, paralyzing enemies, and other things like that to make the melee combat easier for you. I think this class would have been better if Morrowind had mercenary followers you could hire, since you could just heal and buff them so that they do most of the damage. However, other than some less than stellar followers you get during certain quests, plus a mercenary from the Tribunal expansion, you don't really have this option, so the healer remains a slightly more difficult class to play than the pure mage. Rather than give a special mention for a more hybrid class as part of the mage archetype section, I will mention two particular hybrid classes that I think are very nice in a section of their own for hybrid builds. The two pre-made classes in question are Battlemage and Spellsword. Both are a mix of martial and magic, with not much in terms of roguish gameplay. The Nightblade is the best stealth plus magic build, and I've already mentioned it in the rogue section. The Battlemage's specialization is magic, meaning that all magic skills get a +5 and level up faster. The favorite attributes are intelligence and strength, which works perfectly for a magical fighter. Intelligence gives you extra magicka, and strength grants extra damage, fatigue, and encumbrance. The Battlemage's major skills are alteration, axe, conjuration, destruction, and heavy armor. The minor skills are alchemy, enchant, longblade, marksman, and mysticism. You can use either axe or longblade as melee damage options, wear heavy armor for a high armor score, and then use destruction and marksman for alternate damage at a range, or in the case of destruction up close as well in the case of touch spells. Alteration helps you traverse the world more easily and allows you to open locked doors and containers. Conjuration is always a nice skill to have to summon allies to fight for you, and even summon weapons, either axes or long blades, or heavy armor for yourself without being forced to carry actual weapons and armor on your person necessarily. Alchemy is of course good for the purpose of crafting simple yet effective potions cheaply. Enchant is nice to have, though I'd have preferred restoration in its place. Yes, it's nice that your enchanted items take longer to run out of charges, but at the same time you can't really heal yourself without potions unless you train your restoration to a decent level. Finally, mysticism is a great utility spell school, in particular for teleporting around with mark and recall and the intervention spells. Honestly, other than missing restoration, this is a super solid class if you want a well-balanced combination of the warrior and mage, which makes sense, seeing as this class is appropriately named Battle Mage. A very similar hybrid class is the Spellsword, whose specialization is also magic, granting +5 to all magic skills and making them level up faster. Its favorite attributes are willpower and endurance, so this is a slightly more defensively focused class, since endurance increases your max HP, and is great to get to a high level as early in the game as possible for extra HP, and both endurance and willpower increase your fatigue. Of course, willpower also has the added bonus of increasing your chance to successfully cast spells, which is very nice for a class that does indeed want to cast spells a significant amount of the time. The Spellsword's major skills are Alteration, Block, Destruction, Longblade, and Restoration. And the minor skills are Alchemy, Axe, Blunt, Enchant, and Medium Armor. So you have a weapon plus a shield as your melee options, with a choice between Longblade, Axe, and Blunt, offering you a variety of one-handed weapons, especially in terms of enchanted weapons you may find in your travels, as quest rewards or bought from vendors. Destruction is your alternate option for damage from afar or in melee with touch spells. Do keep in mind that destruction also has some interesting effects like draining an enemy's fatigue, which will help you a lot to make the enemy in question have a harder time to hit you with their weapon attacks. Medium armor is the armor choice, which can be a bit underwhelming in terms of the enchanted medium armor pieces you can find in particular, though of course you could enchant your own medium armor gear, especially since you do have enchant as a tagged skill, so it's going to be easier to do this. Restoration is of course always a welcome addition, so you can heal yourself, cure various afflictions, restore attributes, and so on. Alteration helps in traversal and opening locked doors and containers. And finally, alchemy is a great choice to make good and cheap potions instead of having to buy them from vendors or rely on random loot. I personally prefer the Spellsword over the Battlemage just because of the fact that it has restoration as a tagged skill, but I can see how the Battlemage could be better due to using heavy armor instead of the Spellsword's medium armor, so you could go for either of these two classes if you're seeking a warrior-mage hybrid build. For a warrior-rogue hybrid, I can't say that I found a super good class. The archer would be the closest thing to a warrior-rogue hybrid. It has combat as a specialization, strength and agility as favored attributes. The major skills are athletics, block, light armor, long blade, and marksman, and the minor skills are medium armor, restoration, sneak, spear, and unarmored. It has 3 armor skills, which I think is far too many options, so that's why I don't really recommend it, but since it's the only true hybrid of mostly stealth and combat skills, then it does get a special mention. Finally, if you want a true hybrid class that combines warrior, mage, and rogue, then the only class I can recommend for this is the Witchhunter. Its specialization is magic, and its favorite attributes are agility and intelligence. The major skills are alchemy, conjuration, enchant, light armor, and marksman. The minor skills are block, blunt weapon, mysticism, sneak, and unarmored. This class thankfully only has 2 armor skills, though I would have preferred light and medium armor, or just light armor and have the other skill be restoration or another melee weapon. I would have liked to see long blade as a skill instead of either unarmored or mysticism, so it's once again not necessarily a class I think is super well done, but it does fulfill the theme of a fully hybrid class for those who are interested in it, and it should be fairly decent to play. Do keep in mind that most hybrid classes tend to be more difficult to play than the pure or mostly pure classes, so if you're a beginner, I'd recommend you pick one of the classes I recommended as part of the warrior, rogue, or mage sections. In particular, the first 2, since mage gameplay is a bit more difficult mainly due to running out of magicka. Your magicka restores far too slowly for you to be able to keep using spells in a dungeon, so you're forced to rest or use a lot of potions. Now that I've recommended all the classes I think are the best out of the pre-made ones, with a few extra mentions for classes that are slightly more difficult or don't have 100% the best skill choices, I have a few tips to leave you with. When it comes to alchemy, here are some fairly simple potion recipes for the basics. They will serve you well if you decide you want to craft potions yourself. For restore health, I recommend using marshmallow and salt rice. They're very easy to find as loot and cheap to buy. For restoring and fortifying your fatigue, Scuttle and Scrib Jerky is a good combo, and same thing, you're likely to find them easily while exploring, and they're not expensive to buy. You can also combine marshmallow, salt rice, and kwama eggs for a dual potion that restores both your health and fatigue if you're feeling spicy. Unfortunately, restore magicka potions aren't as easy to make because comberries are the only easier to find and easier to buy ingredient, whereas the others are more rare and expensive. So for restore magicka potions, I recommend buying them from merchants instead. Another tip is, especially in the beginning as you're figuring out what's what, pick up any ingredients you find since most of them will be very valuable to sell to merchants, some may be useful for certain quests, and of course if you're going to use alchemy, that's going to be useful to you so you don't have to go out of your way later on to find ingredients. Of course, this also applies to other items like enchanted ones. You never know what magical effects could be useful to you, and even if you normally wouldn't use that type of item on your character, the enchantment could come in handy later. Not to mention the fact that enchanted items are usually quite valuable, and so you could make a nice little profit by selling them if you do find the effects useless. Finally, don't let yourself get overwhelmed by the huge amount of quests, explorable locations, and options available to you in the game. Try to focus on either things that your chosen class is good at, or things your chosen archetype might be interested in. Or if you find certain quests or locations you're personally interested in pursuing and exploring, of course, go for it. The world of Morrowind is filled with so many things that it can feel like it's too much, so having an idea of an archetype or character to roleplay can help you limit your choices and makes for a far more enjoyable experience. These pre-made classes can definitely serve as inspiration, though if you feel comfortable creating your own class based on what I've said here about the positives and negatives of the pre-made ones, even better. You can come up with your own character idea to roleplay as. The Elder Scrolls games have always had a bit of a problem with allowing players to do whatever they want and increase all their skills to become not just a jack of all trades, but a master of all. And I think, especially in the case of these older titles like Morrowind and even Oblivion, doing everything in one single playthrough ends up making the experience feel less fun and rewarding, so that's why I recommend role-playing or setting certain limitations like in the case of a challenge run. This has been my guide discussing the best pre-made classes in the Elder Scrolls Morrowind, with a focus on well-built classes that are easier to play for beginners. I hope you found this useful, and if there are any veteran Morrowind players here, please feel free to share your own tips and tricks in the comments, since that will be super useful for any beginner who finds this video. I am, after all, just one person who plays the game in a certain way, and I'm also not a super skilled player myself, so extra advice from the community is much appreciated. If you're looking forward to more guides and discussions about games I like, be sure to subscribe, and leave a like and comment while you're at it too. They really help. This has been B Tier Mutineer. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.